Hi, Julia Funke. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We're super excited to have you. Okay, so first and foremost, what triggered you to want to become an immigration attorney?
So that's a fun story. So I started in college. I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. So I was in the education program. It's fun now because I have a kindergartner. And so I get to do her
Cute.
homework. And I'm like, that could have been my life. And so the first 2 years, you're just taking like general education requirements and then applying for the program after 2 years. So for the first 2 years, I was just taking things I was interested in. So I was taking a bunch of political science classes. And then I took this class called Patterns of Migration with Dr. Sarah Blue, who I should probably send an email to at some point, since she
Okay.
basically inspired my whole career. So we were reading about the migrant experience and looking at patterns of migration historically. And that coincided with I started to get really politically active. I was attending rallies for the Dream Act and just getting really involved in those kinds of causes. So then I get my acceptance letter into the education program and I meet with my advisor. And she's like, okay, so no more Spanish classes, no more politics. Like your coursework is laid out for you. Like these are the things that you're going to do. And I just immediately like felt like itchy. I was like, oh, I don't think I want to do this. And so I drive to a dinner with my parents. There's like balloons. And I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do it. And the very next week, I changed my major to Spanish translation and business. I picked up a minor in international politics, and I was like, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to be an immigration attorney. So I applied to 10 law schools. My personal statement for every single law school was all about how I was going to be an immigration attorney. And so that's exactly what I did. So I like have, I always hire legal interns and people talk about like, what classes should I take? And I'm always telling people like, oh, try a lot of everything. Like, don't be set on one thing, like see what you like. And I'm like the complete opposite story of that, where I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And it's exactly what I did do. And now I've been practicing for over 10 years and it's been the best experience. I love what I do. I've never looked back. So yeah, I just on a whim was like, you know what, I'm going to be an immigration attorney. And then that's what I did.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
But why immigration though? Was there a particular case that you saw and you were like, man, I got to stand up for this? Or what was it?
So when I talked about the Dream Act, so the Dream Act, obviously, it was introduced in 2001, is a bipartisan bill. It has never passed. There's been several versions of it. And it's really a bipartisan effort in recognition that you have a whole population of people who were brought here as children. And some of them grow up and don't even know that they don't have immigration status, right? Until they're applying for college or they can't get student loans or anything like that, right? And so the Dream Act was supposed to help childhood arrivals to come into immigration status. And then it's never passed. It's on every single year. It's like, well, we see something happen. So then eventually President Obama, through executive action, has the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. But even that has been challenged several times in court. It currently, you can renew it if you already have DACA, but you can't, no one else can, like new applicants can't apply. So I talk about how the thing that really inspired me was the Dream Act and this cause. And then it's amazing that 10 years into my practice, it's still not happened. And I think that kind of sums up just the frustrations of immigration law in general, that we deal with like tremendous backlogs. There hasn't been meaningful immigration reform in decades. And so it really is at the whim of different administrations and it's always changing. It's all like policy and how things are being adjudicated, but the law itself is never being updated. So I think, when I think back to like 2010, Julia, going to these Dream Act rallies, I think it was the first time that I realized that there was this like underserved population of people sort of in the shadows that had no say in the fact that they were here without status and then were not being allowed to come into status in the only place that's ever been their home, right? You come here as a baby, you grew up here, this is your country. Right. And then there's no path forward for you. So I think it was probably the Dream Act that inspired the whole thing. So now when I teach immigration law, when I teach about deferred action, I'm always like, it's kind of depressing and sad a little bit because I'm like, well, here we are and it's still not passed. Like maybe this will be the year. So we'll see. Maybe when it finally passes, maybe I'll retire.
Yes. And then we can all give all the energy to you and say, thank you for all your work, Julia, your lifetime's work, your lifetime achievement. Wow. That's really inspiring. And I'm I know on behalf of a lot of people going through this process, they're probably really grateful for the work that you're doing and trying to push this forward. And it's extremely frustrating that even after 10 years of you putting your heart and soul into this, among other colleagues doing the same, that we still don't have that reform. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. What's really interesting is you do have a ton of experience in marriage and immigration laws. Tell me about that. How does that work as an immigration attorney?
Sure. So I would say that immigration law generally, there's several different practice areas within immigration, but the main ones, you have family-based immigration, which is your marriage, fiance visas, petitioning for family members, and then your employment-based, and then sort of what I would label as humanitarian relief. So asylum, cases under the Convention Against Torture, U visas, trafficking visas, which are T visas. So there's like these three unique areas of immigration law, and I'm fortunate to practice in all three. Because I just love all of it.
Why not?
Just love all of it.
Get it all.
So on the family-based side, you're looking at marriage-based, and then people petitioning for family members, so parents, children, and I think that those, there's different rewards in each area that you practice in, but I think on that side of it, it's you're talking about families and reunification, and I think that's really rewarding.
Yeah, I think so too. And it sounds like the most emotional, or the most where you can really go deep with people and really help
Definitely.
their everyday living. And so what is the process for marrying someone, let's say, that is overseas, where the foreign spouse is in another country and there's a US citizen and they want to get married? What does that look like?
So there's a couple different options. If you wanted to, it depends on what you want to do. But if you're willing to get married in your partner's home country, the marriage will be legally recognized in the US as long as it's legally recognized in that country. So what you could do is go there and get married and then start the paperwork process to bring them here. If you wanted to get married in the US, then you would file for a visa for them to be able to come into the US, so that then you'd get married here and then you would start the green card process. So it really depends on what your goals are. In terms of like documentation, it's pretty similar what you have to show. But procedurally, it's a little bit different. There's pros and cons to each. But in general, I think the better way is to get married, and if they're abroad in their home country, to start the process for a couple different reasons.
Yeah. What are those reasons?
So
off the riff, my gut is telling me that too, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Yeah. So the thing is that if you want to bring them here, you're going to file an I-129F petition, which is for a K-1 visa. So first it has to process here in the US with USCIS, so the United States Immigration Agency. Current processing as of today, because I checked this morning before we jumped on here, is 15.5 months. So it's going to take them a long time to approve just the petition. Once you get the approval, then it gets forwarded to the National Visa Center. They will create a case ID, email you to get the process started, and then they transfer it to the consulate. And so then you have to fill out a visa application online at the consulate, schedule your appointment, there's a medical exam, and you do all of that. So you're looking at 15 to 19 months to get this process to eventually get an interview, if there are available interviews. Then you come into the US, then you have to get married within 90 days. And then after you get married, then you file for your green card. And so when you file for your green card, they'll let you file for an employment authorization until your green card is approved. It'd be wonderful if we were in an immigration system where you filed your green card and it was immediately approved.
Sure.
But we don't live in that system. So it'll take like a year or so. So in the meantime, you're going to need to work. So when you file for your green card, you'll also file for an employment authorization document, so an EAD. So you've spent 15 to 18 months with the petition, the consular, now you're here. Let's say you get married, in 2 weeks. You don't take the whole 90 days. Some people do. You're still going to have to get all your paperwork together, file it, and then wait to get an EAD to be able to work. And so that can take, anywhere from, sometimes it's as short as like 4 or 5 months to get the EAD. Sometimes it's as long as a year. It depends on the green card backlogs. So to me, it's an option that is, it's going to take a long time. It's costly because you're doing 2 separate processes. And then you're going to also take a financial loss, assuming that your partner normally works, because they're going to be here and not be able to work for, upwards of a year. The other option where you would get married in their home country, as long as it's legally recognizable in that country, is then you would start the process for you directly file the green card. So you would file an I-130 petition in the US. The filing fee is the same as the I-129F. So you're going to pay the same. And then once that's approved, which will take a similar amount of time as the K-1 would have, then you're going to do the consular process just like you would have. But the difference is you're going to enter as a green card holder.
Okay.
So then
you can start working.
So you can work right away.
Right.
And then you're not going to have to pay. So on the K-1 side, you paid the filing fee, and then you have to pay the 485 filing fee and the green card filing fee once you're here. The other route, you're going to pay for the I-130 and the visa fee at the consulate. But when you come in, you're done. You're going to have your green card. You're not going to have to go through another process or pay more. So it's more cost effective. I think it's more time effective. And it doesn't have the same amount of loss, because you could be, and it's really difficult when something like that is uncertain, like financial uncertainty. It's not even like, like, oh, within X amount of days, I have to get my EAD. The government will just process it whenever they want. And you can check on it and like raise requests, and they'll send you an email like, we're working on it. And there's no timeline. And so I think that makes your introduction to America, really
stressful,
frustrating, right?
Yeah.
There's uncertainty. You can't even start looking for a job because you can't tell an employer when you're going to be authorized to work. So I just think that's a much more stressful process. So if you're sure about it, you want to get married, I think that the direct green card processing is the better way to go.
Okay, so I have so many follow-up questions. I'll just start with the first one. Okay, so I decide, you're right, we're just going to go, me and my imaginary fiance, we're going to go get married in his home country. If we go there and whatever, the 15 months goes by, we have a successful wedding, whatever, can I bring him with me now back to the US? Or is there a separate process? Do I have to become a resident of that country? How does all of that work now?
No, so if you would get married to start the process,
Okay.
And then it depends. I mean, it depends on everyone's individual situation. If you could live there with him while it processes, then you could just stay there until he has his green card. If not, once you get married, that's when you'd file the paperwork. So that's when the timeline would start. So it depends on each couple's situation. A lot of times, I represent clients who are already both overseas, and that's how they met. So the US citizen will have been doing missionary work or working overseas or studying overseas, and they'll have met somebody. So then if they start that process, they'll move back to the US together once the paperwork is approved. If you're in a situation where you've truly been sort of like long distance dating internationally, you could be apart for a long time, but not any longer than you would be with the K-1 visa, which is why I'm like, I would just go ahead and fly over, get married, start the process so that when they do enter, they have their green card, they're ready to go.
Smart. So what is the likelihood of a K-1 visa getting approved?
Good question. So it's a good question. So I don't have the current stats on what their approval ratings are, but I know that I saw that for the first 3 quarters of this year, they're trending up approval ratings, where 2022 was the lowest in 10 years.
Wow.
The approval rating. And I read a study that correlated that to 90 Day Fiancé. Which I think is sort of sensationalized the K-1 visa. But in general, and so at the low point, it was like 66% approval rating, and that was like last year. But in general, I am hesitant to throw out stats and be like, oh, you've got a 95% chance of getting approved, because it's so individual. If it's a relationship where you met to get, like, because you have to have met face to face. Like if you met each other and you've been seeing each other for several years and splitting your time back and forth, or you were studying there and you've built a relationship and you have all this evidence to show that it's a real relationship, I think it's going to get approved. If you met online and you've met one time for 2 days and 3 months later you're filing K-1, I think there's going to be more scrutiny. So it's hard to put like a numerical value on approval ratings, because it really depends on the individual couple.
That's super interesting. So I heard there's different variables that are considered when getting approved. What are some of those variables, and what traditionally gets flagged as questionable?
Sure. So, and it's kind of the same for both. I mentioned the documentation is kind of the same for whether you're doing fiancé or the marriage base. So you have to prove that this is like a bona fide relationship, right? So the things that help that is if you've met each other, if your families know each other. On the fiancé side, obviously you won't have like commingled things and you're not living together yet if you're bringing him here. On the marriage-based side, you're looking at, do you live together? Have you commingled your assets and your finances, which I think is super outdated. Nonetheless, that's one of the things that they look for. Photos together. I mean, it's kind of fun to work on family-based cases because a lot of the evidence will be like cards to each other and love letters and, text messages. And you can kind of see people's relationships develop because they want to see that this is a real relationship. So if you are truly international, you'd want to have evidence that you've been coming to see each other, that you've built that relationship, or phone records or FaceTime records or whatever it is to show that how you're building this relationship, that it's a real relationship.
Amazing. And what does this actually look like? Do you apply online? Do you have to show up somewhere? I'm just imagining people like screenshotting all their texts and putting it into a binder and running it down to some. Yeah.
I told my class on Monday night, that the government hates trees because everything is still filed on paper. Right. There's some things that immigration has moved to filing online, but very few. So most everything is filed like on hard copy paper, like FedEx overnighted to the agency. When you're doing your visa applications at the consulate, that's online. But the underlying petition that you file, we're talking like lots and lots of paper. And it's, it's all got to be physical. So I've had couples drop off like books of, she like made him like annual books of all their pictures and she dropped it off and I was like making copies of these books. Oh. And I feel like her green card interview was like 30 seconds. It was like so obvious how much these two people loved each other that we went into the interview. And he was like, all right, well, I'm going to approve the green card. And I looked at them and I was like, that never happens. Like it was so fast. But yeah, it's a lot of documentation. And especially, sometimes you have couples who, understandably don't speak the same language and like one or both are trying to learn each other's. So then you'll have like text messages or they'll be communicating through apps, trying to translate. So then it can get even harder because you have to be able to prove that they have a relationship. So how do you communicate? How do you understand each other? Right. So the documentation can get pretty intense.
So once you've submitted all your documentation, I heard we get an interview. Is that what happens next?
So if you're doing the marriage-based green card and they're here, because that happens, right? I guess that's the third scenario I haven't talked about, where a foreign national might be in the U.S. going to school or on some other kind of visa, and then you get married here. Then that interview, that'll be here. They'll have an interview where the couple both parties appear, and it's not like the proposal. I was telling my class that I was like, it's not. They don't like put you in separate rooms. Like, what side of the bed does he sleep on? Right. It's pretty calm. If on the overseas part, then your foreign partner is going to an interview at the consulate. Okay.
And what's the turnaround time from I just submitted my documents to getting an interview?
So I recently I have a K1 that's at the consulate stage now, so it's a good example. So I filed it in November of last year. It was approved a couple weeks ago. It got moved to NVC. So now they've gotten a case number and then she's got to submit an application and then she'll get to schedule an interview, hopefully within. So they approved the I-129F for 4 months. So you would think that would be, they anticipate interviewing you within 4 months.
Yeah.
The consular office can, in their discretion, extend it if they don't do that because they don't always do that. So they can get extended, but hopefully within a couple months, you have your interview and then they'll produce your visa.
Wow. Okay. And let's say the K1 visa gets denied for whatever reason. Does the consulate or whomever, do they have to provide the reasons as to why it was denied? Okay.
Yeah. So you'll get like a worksheet, like a visa refusal worksheet that'll explain, why it was denied. Or if it was in person after the interview, they might tell you in person.
Interesting. And
if it's in the US and something gets denied, they send you like a lengthy denial notice.
Wow. Interesting. That's different dependent on the situation.
So it's the consulates are under the Department of State and the immigration agencies are on the Department of Homeland Security. So that makes it like really fun where you have like too many chefs in the kitchen. Everyone's doing things a little bit different. And then the people that are suffering from all of that confusion are the people trying to apply and navigate the system.
Wow. So if the K1 visa gets denied, can you reapply?
You can. You can apply again one more time.
Only one more time.
Mm-hmm.
if you
I
can't
think we saw
K1,
that on the most recent season of 90 Day Fiance, right? She's like, we only have this one more shot.
Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about 90 Day Fiance because we both watched it. I didn't watch every single episode, but I feel like I did. So let's see how much I really got into. But I know you did, which is really, really exciting. How real is 90 Day Fiance, the show? Is that actually what it's like?
No, I don't think so. And so I mistakenly watched the first 2 episodes of season 1 before I realized I was not on season 10. But I'm glad I did, because you could see kind of the contrast of the couples that originally appeared on the show and then sort of how it has evolved over the last 10 seasons. I definitely think that people appearing on the show now might have other reasons first of all, they're wanting to be on the show. I think it might be more about, you see this with all reality shows, right? Like you want a social media following and this is how you're going to make it. You're going to be on TV. So you have that aspect of it. The other thing is the basic premise of the show, I think, is flawed. Because the way the show is set up is just, it's just like, I think, I don't know if it's every other country, but Americans specifically love this concept. Like, will they or won't they get married, right? We have so many
everything is life or death
shows. Like, will they get married? You've got The Bachelor and Love is Blind, and will they make it to the altar? Right. And so they've set 90 Day Fiance up. Arguably it might have been the first, right? It's been on forever. Right. They set it up that way, like, oh, they're coming in and they have 90 days to decide if they're going to get married. When in reality, if you've been through this process and you've waited 15 to 18 months to get the visa, if you're going to marry this person or not. You wouldn't have gone through that process if you weren't. So most of the time people are getting their K1 visa, coming here, and then just getting married. It's difficult because you don't know when it's going to get approved. So what most people would do is have like a civil ceremony and then plan a bigger ceremony later, because you can't have planned a wedding because you have no idea when it'll get approved. So usually, people come in, they get married, they proceed with the green card, they plan a bigger party later. The show makes it seem like this is this trial period. We have 77 days left. Like, are we going to make it? And that's just not, it's great. It's great bad TV, right? Like,
we love it.
Love to watch it.
We're so here for it. Yes.
But I don't think that's how it plays out.
So, okay. Thank you for sobering us up to reality. What is truthful? Is there any sort of truth? Just looking at season 10, season 1, I love that you did a comparison. It's like, it probably was a little
accidentally.
I know, but for real, that's actually pretty cool. But is there anything that is somewhat realistic that we can pull from the show, at least season 10?
Yeah. So no, I think there is, and I'm not invalidating any of their relationships. I think some of them have very real relationships. I think in any relationship that you're ever going to be in, there could be, people have different reasons and motives. You're going to encounter that anywhere, not just in international relationships where there's, a green card on the line, even though that's how the show they want to push that narrative. I think one of the things that struck me as really realistic is like Manuel can't work. And he's asking, what's her name? Is it
Ashley?
Ashley. He's asking Ashley, he needs to send money back to his family because he's responsible for his family, but he can't work in the US. And they sort of they don't directly address why that is. They are sort of like, oh, we can't work. And then they just make it this huge, problem between the two of them, that she feels like she's having to send all this money and that this wasn't talked about. And then they're even arguing about their wedding. Like, she's like, he's hearing stuff that we want to do for the wedding. And he's like, that money could go to my family, but I should also get a wedding. And I think it's good that they showed the frustration over him not being able to work, but they didn't really explain the timeline or why that is, or how long it will be before he can work. And he's looking at if they wait, because the show wants you to wait till the 89th day and
the 11th hour.
Yeah, we decided. And then they file. He's looking at, 6-12 months before he's going to have work authorization. So when they're having these fights, I'm kind of sitting under my covers, this fight's going to get way worse as time gets on, because she's going to be taking on a huge financial burden, as well as sponsoring him, where she has to then agree to be financially responsible for him. So instead of framing the show to show sort of how those financial inequalities could burden a relationship or how that process can really complicate things, they've just made it they're having a spat in a restaurant and he storms out. And I'm like, this is actually a much bigger problem.
Yeah. Yeah. We need to lean into this. Okay. So many things from that. I think it was Jasmine as well has a son. in Panama. And so what does that look like? If you do marry, right, you're a US citizen, you come here, what does it look like to bring kids over or any other family members?
Yeah, so you can bring your family. And she says that. That was also a moment that I was like under my covers. I was like, oh no. Because first of all, I don't understand why he quit his job anyway. I was very confused by that. Like,
I think we all were. Like, real quick,
like
Gino.
A 24/7 chaperone? I don't understand. I think she's going to be okay. She's like, I quit my job so that I can like help you adjust. And it's like, okay. But she raised a question. She's like, I'll need you to sponsor my children.
Right.
So, they'll be able to sponsor the kids and bring them, but you have to. So when you sponsor somebody, and this is the difference with the K-1 versus the marriage-based green card that I should mention as well. When you do the K-1, you have to be able to show that you make 100% of the poverty guidelines to sponsor them. But on the marriage or on a family-based side, when you're petitioning for someone's green card, it's 125% of the federal poverty guidelines. So you have to a little bit more. And then that's by household. So if you go into that chart and you put like what your household is, and it'll show you like, they publish it. So you can go see what 100% is, what 125 is. So his income they'll take into account that he's already sponsoring her. So to bring the kids, like her concern is like, you don't have a job now. Are you going to be able to bring my kids over? Like we have no income. So I think the show wanted you to be like, people think that she's in it for the wrong reasons or she wants his money. And I think she has a very basic, fundamental question of how am I going to bring my children here if there's no income and we can't afford to sponsor them? And she's going to be looking at, up to a year to be able to work and then establish that she could. It's not a good situation. Right.
It's not a good look for everybody. No. So what, backing up a little bit. Yeah. We love the sentiment, Gino. We love, but I think
I was like, I think you could have taken like some vacation time.
Yeah, PTO.
I was like,
we can't PTO anyway.
Right.
So let's back up. What is a sponsor? What does it mean to be a sponsor?
So you're the person petitioning for them. So in the marriage-based context, if you're the US citizen, you're petitioning for your partner, they're the beneficiary. So you are signing the paperwork and you're also signing what's called an affidavit of support, which is a contract between you and the federal government that you're going to financially support this person, that you bringing this person here is not going to burden the government. And what that means is, and you can go look at it on USCIS's website, they're very clear about it. Like it's not hidden, although I don't think a lot of people are super aware when they sign this, what it means. But basically, you're agreeing that you're financially responsible for them. So if they ever like use public benefits or become a public charge in any way, that you're going to be responsible for that. So you'll have to pay the government back for any benefits they get. And the government can sue you for those. And those obligations stay in place until your spouse or any family member that you sponsor, but in this context, we're talking about marriages, until your spouse works 40 quarters of qualifying work under the Social Security Act, or becomes a U.S. citizen. And the thing is that you don't ever have to do either of those things. You can be on a green card indefinitely. There's no reason, like no one forces you to become a citizen once you have your green card. A lot of people stay green card holders forever for various reasons. You have to pass an English and a civics test to become a citizen. So if it's someone older who comes and doesn't learn the language, they may never become a citizen because they don't want to take the test. A lot of people don't become a citizen. And so there's nothing that forces you to do that. And then you can't force somebody to work 40 quarters. So that's 10 years of work. So, and that doesn't go away if you get divorced. That's the most fun part about it. And that's my favorite part of the USCIS website is it says that like explicitly. It's like not like divorce is not a qualifying event. Like you stay responsible for them. So that's how it looks when you sponsor someone and you fill out this form showing that you have enough income to support them, which is what Jasmine's concern is. Gino's concern could be, I'm going to be on the hook for a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Maybe indefinitely.
Right. Okay. Wow. So playing out the Gino and Jasmine scenario even more, if the kids were to come over before she was a citizen, would he be the sponsor for the kids as well? Or would she be the sponsor if they were to be married?
She can sponsor them.
Okay.
Depending on, the one child's young. I don't know what the ages are of her children.
Yeah.
But they'll be able to follow to join her, or so it plays out in different ways depending on the situation, the ages of the kids. But so she can bring her children, or he could, if they're minor children, he's going to become their adopted father, then he could bring them too. Regardless, there's going to have to be enough financial support for them to come.
Wow. Okay. So is there anything that you recommend couples consider when they do get married outside of just the traditional immigration process?
Yeah, so I would, especially in international relationships, I would recommend a prenup. If nothing else, so that you're having these conversations. I mean, if you look at Ashley and Manuel, like she didn't know that he's obligated to pay his family a certain amount of money that they depend on every week until he was here.
Right.
If for nothing else, I think that couples, I mean, I think I recommend prenups for everybody, not just, but in an international relationship, I think making sure that there's full transparency about everybody's obligations, what everyone has going on. And then because of these immigration implications with the affidavit of support, I think those are things that you should think about and address and work into your prenup.
Wow, definitely. So prenups generally have a taboo or a stigma associated with them that has traditionally changed over the last couple of decades. And we're definitely seeing more folks, especially Gen Zs and millennials, wanting them for so many reasons. What's interesting is that it does feel like more overseas couples, I'm going to call them like borderless couples, are on the rise too. Is that true? Like, are we seeing more couples getting married that are overseas couples, or has this always been a thing?
That's an interesting question. I love that, borderless couples. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I would assume, I don't know. I don't have hard stats in front of me, but I would assume that with technology and the way that everything is so online all the
Connected.
time.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the couples on 90 Day Fiance, they like met on like language apps where they were like trying to learn a different language and communicate. So yeah, I'm sure it has increased. Yeah, it makes sense to me that it would have.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's interesting that the rise of potentially both together, again, no hard stats in front of us, but is really interesting. And also now with the accessibility of prenups through something like HelloPrenup, it makes sense that more people are looking into it. And we see this all the time.
Right.
Is there something that folks should consider when getting a prenup that may or may not be a conversation piece for folks that are not a borderless couple?
Yeah, so I think that, so when I look at prenups for what I call sort of like mixed status couples, so you've got a US citizen and then someone who's not a US citizen.
Right.
And there's power differentials there, right? So there's vulnerabilities. Someone's leaving their home country, giving up a lot. But then on the other side, the US citizen is taking on financial obligations that could be potentially really burdensome indefinitely. So I think there's some things to navigate there. So when you're looking at a prenup, first and foremost, I think it's important to include a clause that anything that you decide about spousal support is not undermining the affidavit of support, because the affidavit of support is a federal contract between the US citizen and the government that will supersede your prenup. So I would maybe potentially have a clause in there that's like, notwithstanding the affidavit of support obligations, like any waiver of spousal support or whatever, obviously, we understand that there's still these affidavit of support. And then following that, I would recommend having a conversation and including a clause about a timeline for citizenship and coming to an agreement about when your partner is going to seek citizenship, because they don't have to. But on the marriage-based side, most people have to have a green card for 5 years, and then they can apply for citizenship. If it's based on marriage, you can apply after 3 years. So having that conversation and coming to an agreement that that person is going to naturalize within 3 years, so that the 864 obligations, that affidavit of support obligations, those go away, and then puts you on more equal footing, right? Where one person doesn't feel obligated or indebted to the other person. I think that's good for a relationship, right?
Right.
Just the dynamics of your relationship. But having those conversations at the prenup stage, make sure that you're both, first of all, very clear about, what this sponsorship is going to entail, that it's not this like simple, like I sign my name and it's done. It's an indefinite obligation until one of two qualifying events happen that are not guaranteed to happen. Having those conversations so that both parties understand like what's at risk, what they're doing, so that at least you've talked about it. So that on both sides, if you're not on the same page, you'd find that out. I think people in general don't want to talk about money, don't want to talk about, right? Those are conversations within couples that are trickier conversations. I think that makes a prenup even more important, to have those conversations and be totally transparent with each other ahead of time. Makes for a stronger marriage. So in the international context, I think it's even more important because there are these sort of additional layers of complication that I think are a good thing to talk about ahead of time, especially because the foreign intended spouse might not know how involved the process is for the US citizen or what it's going to entail. And so making sure that everybody kind of knows and understands, I think that that's a good way to start your relationship, is having those conversations, being transparent, and then both parties feel protected.
I love that, especially because love is a universal language, but cultural differences are not, right? Everybody comes from a different context, a different past, a different...
As we saw in season 10.
Oh, we sure did. And so to your point, it's really important to just get everybody on the same page, literally. Right. And a prenup is designed to do that, whether you are a borderless couple or you are getting married, overseas, it's all the same. And I think to your point, it's even more important to really take the time and walk through and make sure everybody really understands, especially about the sponsorship part. I honestly didn't know that until I started working here either. And to me, if I was the foreign intended spouse and I didn't know about that, and I love my partner, I would want to know. And so I think that's really interesting that somebody like you could help them understand the intricacies of this. It's not just marriage. It's not just being together. It's we're liable till death do us part. Let's make sure that we're on the same page and we really understand what we're doing.
And like, what if, your partner doesn't want to become a citizen because it impacts their citizenship at their home country? You're like, all of these things vary, right?
Right.
So if you don't have that conversation, you might not know that they have hesitations that they don't ever want to become a citizen. You'd want to know that. Those are conversations to have. So, and I think kind of not that it's sterile, but it's an organic way to have those conversations with like disclosures where you're like filling things out that doesn't feel so aggressive. It's not like two people sitting down, like bring all your stuff out, like show me your books. It's a very natural, organic way that feels very much like this is a to-do list. This is what we have to do, that we're trending toward our wedding, in a way that makes both parties feel comfortable. And it's a safer way to like have those conversations, work your way around it, especially if you're, using HelloPrenup, which makes it so simple and easy for them. I think that's the best thing that you could do.
So is there any reason why a couple should not consider a prenup as a borderless couple?
Sure. So no. Okay. But I do say that you want to be careful in your prenup that there's nothing in your prenup that would undermine the validity of your relationship, because you mentioned that you used to be kind of taboo, right, about prenups. I don't think that's the case anymore, and I have a lot of the couples that I've worked with, they're young. I do think that we're trending towards everyone being like, this is just financially intelligent. Like, this is just something that people should do. But traditionally, and I talked about how, the government wants to see commingling of finances and all these like old school things, where do you have kids is, what they look at is like, is it a valid marriage? I think it's really outdated, some of the stuff they look at for like bona fide relationships. But prenups have historically been looked at as taboo, even though that's changing. You don't have to submit your prenup to the government in this process. They won't. It's not like a list of required documents. But if you were in an interview and they asked, did you sign a prenup? You never, ever, ever, ever want to lie to the government. Just basically all around. I think that's probably a general blanket statement. Yep. But specifically in immigration, don't lie to the government. Because if they ever find out, it's a misrepresentation and it can cause you major problems. So at that point, if they said, did you have a prenup? You'd be like, sure, yeah, I signed one, and you'd show it to them. You don't want your prenup to have anything like wonky in it that's like, I agree to give you this in exchange for you sponsoring my green card, because then it's going to look as if the relationship's not real. Right. So no, I think everyone should get a prenup. I don't think there's any reason to not get a prenup, but don't use your prenup to try to like get around any of these obligations or do anything that would otherwise undermine the validity of your relationship.
That makes so much sense. So let's say the couple's on board, they really want to get a prenup. They go through HelloPrenup to do the process. What does that look like? I know that for us, we recommend folks actually doing wet signatures and going to get their document notarized. How would they do that if one of them is overseas? What does that look like?
So that's dependent on what their specific situation is. If the US citizen can, because depending on what route they're going, what paperwork is pending, the foreign spouse, intended spouse might not be able to come. Because if you have like a pending immigrant petition, which means that you plan to stay, opposed to non-immigrant, which is like temporary, like visitor visas. So for some visas, you have to show non-immigrant intent that you don't intend to stay. But if you have a pending like marriage case, you clearly intend to stay, they might not let you travel. So it might be easier for the US citizen to travel out versus the foreign intended partner coming in.
Sure.
If the US citizen can travel out, that's what I would recommend, that you go and you go over it together, you print it out, and then I would get it signed and notarized at the consulate, a US consulate, and then it'll be recognized as valid in the United States. If that's not an option, and they have to do it separately, you would want to get it signed and notarized at the consulate, because as long as it's done at the US consulate, they offer those services, then it'll be legally recognizable in the US. You could also do it with a local public notary and then get it authenticated by the consulate. Cool. But if you have to go to the consulate anyway, you might as well just do it there.
Yeah, two birds, one stone. I love that. And is a prenup upheld in another country, or would it have to be upheld in the state that it was written in the US?
So if it's a US prenup, obviously it's going to be enforceable in the US.
Right.
We can't force a foreign country to enforce your US prenup. But there's a couple things that you could do, though. You could either potentially play around with the idea of mirror prenups, having one executed in your home country and one here. Or if you're concerned about foreign assets or anything in a foreign country, you could keep those as separate properties so that they're not even going to be a part of the divorce, so that it would just be in the US. And then the US will if you do a foreign prenup, the US will recognize it most of the time, as long as it's not contrary to public policy. So, making sure that, but that's true of all prenups, right? That nobody was coerced, that it wasn't entered into in the last minute, and the international aspect, that both parties understood it in their own language, and knew what they were signing. And then generally it would be enforceable.
Amazing. So let's say somebody is interested in a prenup. Should they go talk to you before they start their prenup process, during their prenup process, after? When's the best time to consult with you? Okay.
So for sure, if you're interested in putting in additional clauses to your prenup from the immigration standpoint, then I would come to me after. Once you already have your prenup at hand, it's already written, because then I can't really help draft those clauses until I know what the rest of it's going to be, what you're agreeing to for spousal maintenance or anything like that. And then what I would do is I would review it from an immigration standpoint only, because I can practice immigration law in all 50 states. So I can look at it from an immigration perspective, just making sure there's nothing in there or that's been added to it after the fact, after HelloPrenup has made it, that would have any sort of immigration implications or mention anything about something in exchange for sponsorship. Then I would add in the clauses about the affidavit of support and the timeline for citizenship. And usually that would go somewhere after the spousal maintenance section, to fit it in with where it would go. So definitely after, but if you're just starting this process and you're confused about what the best route for you is, whether to do the K-1 versus a marriage base or what it's actually going to entail, then, I would recommend speaking to you before, just to get an idea. So, what sort of where you're headed, what you want to protect. If that's going to help your prenup process, you could certainly talk to me before, but definitely after.
Okay. Yeah, I love it. I would call you all the time. I already do. So, to her point, yes, call her early and often.
All the time.
Julia, you are the best. Is there anything else that you want listeners interested in the immigration process, going through the immigration process, are a borderless couple, that you'd like them to know that I didn't even ask you about?
Just in general, that so many people are tempted to try to navigate these processes by themselves. And whether you contact me or someone else, at the very least, have a free consultation with an immigration attorney and make sure that you understand the process, because these processes are costly and lengthy, and you're talking a lot of time and energy and effort, and they can get messed up really quickly. So I think a lot of people are inclined to try to navigate this process by themselves. They're like forms, we'll fill them out. But something simple as like checking a wrong box could impact your immigration process. So I would just want these couples to know that at least talk to an immigration attorney and make sure that you know what the process is, so that you don't have that as an additional hurdle in your relationship.
Amazing. And if people want to get in touch with you, where should they go to do that?
So they can email me, they can book free consultations with me. We can talk about 90 Day Fiance if you want. You could follow me on social. I have an immigration law Instagram. So any of those. So I guess we could throw those in when we post it.
Perfect. And also, HelloPrenup customers have direct access to Julia as well. So we have integrated her into our platform to make the immigration process as seamless as possible so that you guys can get married with confidence and peace of mind. Julia, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you. And of course, please reach out to Julia if you guys need anything. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren.